What's up, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Variant the Podcast. I'm one of your hosts, Arris Quinones, with Tim Connolly.
What's going on, Variant Nation?
Yeah, and today we have some fun topics. As always, we're going to talk about The Mandalorian, Episode 3, and then the bulk of the episode, we're going to be breaking down DC's death metal and talk about the future of where DC's going and everything happening in the death metal event so far.
It is a wild time in DC Comics, my friends. Good Lord Almighty.
It really is. And it's crazy how these issues, I mean, obviously we're going to talk about it later, but it's crazy how, like, the deeper we get into these death metal issues, the more things are being revealed, like, you know, through the characters. It's so funny because, like, the characters are talking, but it's like, we know what you're really trying to say. Like, you're talking for, like, the pub, like, everyone behind the scenes, prepping us for the change that's coming swiftly.
Yes, and it is rapidly approaching, and it's kind of a culmination of a lot of the things we have been talking about for the past year regarding DC Comics, and the future of a lot of these characters that we know and love and have been around for literally a century.
Yeah, it's pretty crazy. Death Metal issue 5 gave us the biggest revelations thus far, pretty much telling us what the Omniverse is and how DC continuity is going to work going forward. So it's going to be really interesting. But we'll get into that in a bit. First up, the glorious Mandalorian. God, I love that show.
Boy, Mando.
Love that freaking show. And last week's episode, I text you as soon as it finished because I wait for my kids to go to bed and stuff like that. Then I sit in the living room, turn on the surround sound, and watch some Mando. Yeah, and it was my favorite episode thus far. For me, I feel like every episode it keeps thus far for the first 3 keep being better than the last, because the first one was amazing, directed by Jon Favreau.
Yep,
freaking insane with that dragon and stuff like that. Awesome. The Boba Fett reveals. Then the second episode we got the spiders, the ice spiders, which awesome action. Very cool scenes. Got some X-Wings. And then this one, Tim. This one. This is where we basically, they full on went like, oh, we're just going to, well, spoilers, guys. Spoilers galore.
Spoilers for Mandalorian episode 3.
This third episode, they're basically like, we're just going to go full on Clone Wars live action. That's what we're going to do. That's what we're all about. I mean, they already introduced the Darksaber. And in this episode, we got some more Mandalorians.
And it did not disappoint because we got it. Not only did we get more Mandalorians, but they introduced specifically Bo-Katan Kryze, which was a huge introduction into the, and you know, not to say that's a full surprise. We knew that this character was coming, but they introduced her early in the season, and her and the entire team of Mandalorians, and even how they introduced themselves to Din, you know, the Mandalorian, and even explained to him at one point that, you know, they're actual Mandalorians born on Mandalore, and that he's kind of birthed from this cult, right, of the Mandalorians that separated from the main Mandalorians. Man, it was just so good the way that they did it.
Very, very cool. Yeah, because it's so funny because, you know, for people who didn't watch Clone Wars or Rebels, you might not know that much about, like, the Mandalorians, right? So you're probably just thinking, if you're just jumping in with the Mandalorian show, you're like, oh, everything that Mando does and the armor and everyone he's interacted with in the first season and thus far who was Mandalorian, like, those are the Mandalorians. But it's like, no, there's actually different, like, sanctions and or groups of Mandalorians on Mandalore. Like, there's people who, like, broke off. You have, like, the Death Watch and all that stuff. Because she actually tells them, she's like, yo, you're of the Watch, which is the Death Watch, and they're basically a group, like an offshoot of the Mandalorians, which is like a group of zealots, and basically, like, you know, kind of almost crazy people who are super religious, don't show their face to anyone and anything like that. And Mando's all like, no, I follow the way of Mandalore. Like, he is OG, you know what I mean? And she's like, yeah, but, you know, we've evolved. We're more civilized, kind of, is basically what her and her group is saying. So it's really cool. Like, we're getting different factions of, you know, Mandalorians now, which is awesome. Because there's more than just these two branches too. So I'm wondering, like, how deep they're going to go. I mean, the show is literally called The Mandalorian. So, I mean, you would think as, you know, the episodes go on and even, you know, next season, we're probably going to see a lot of different Mandalorians in the series.
Yeah, I absolutely. You have to imagine that that's going to continue to evolve. I just love that they are diving in deeper into the Mandalorian mythos and the backstories, and showing so early on in the second second season rather, the delineation between you know, the true Mandalorians that were born and raised on Mandalore and their culture, and the culture that Din adheres to with the Death Watch, and how he was taught kind of this more very strict religious cult is what she refers to it as, where, you know, they can't remove the helmet and no one can ever see their face. And, you know, but that is clearly going to be setting us up, I would think, at some point for him to realize that he doesn't have to live that way, and he eventually starts taking off his helmet.
I'm wondering too, because, you know, we have Pedro Pascal underneath that helmet, and he's a pretty big actor. So it was kind of crazy seeing, you know, someone like him not show his face, like, you know, for all of season 1 up until, like, you know, the last episode where we briefly see it for like a minute or so, and then so far we haven't seen it again because that's his whole thing. You know, he's like, no, we don't show our faces. And again, like, as we know, like with Suicide Squad and stuff like that, Will Smith, when you hire someone like of that caliber, Deadshot's supposed to be in a mask most of the time, but he wasn't, because why?
Exactly.
It's Will Smith. You're not going to pay Will Smith money and not show Will Smith. So, so it's kind of like in that. So I'm wondering if, you know, you're right with that, where eventually he's like, all right, fine. Maybe I don't have to hide my face all the time. Because we saw hints of that in season 1, you know, where he was on that farm, that planet, where he was starting to fall in love with that lady from the village. And she was like, you know, take off your helmet. And he kind of seemed like he wanted to. Yeah, he thought about it. So it's like, you know, maybe that's where it ultimately goes. And that can kind of be cool, seeing the evolution of it, considering, you know, even Bo-Katan's here too. So that's freaking awesome.
Yeah, without any question. And, you know, as we begin to see that evolve, I guess what the biggest thing for the whole thing is them using this series to build on the in-canon mythos and mythology and backstory and even future stories of Mandalorians as a whole. Because this is clearly setting up, like, you know, what we're seeing with Bo-Katan in the episode. She comes in and she, you know, we learn that she's hunting Moff Gideon to find the Darksaber, right? She knows he has it. She's hunting for him. She wants it because then she can reclaim her and her team can reclaim Mandalore for their people. But she has to have the Darksaber because, you know, that's the legacy of the leaders of Mandalore. So, you know, with that, the clans will all rally around her and they will reclaim Mandalore. So we're setting up already, right, for something much bigger.
Oh, for
much bigger. And then the episode went on, it shows the Mandalorian. He goes to this planet. You know, we see him in the last episode, in episode 2, where he picks up this the frog lady. And he's transporting her because she says, I know where more Mandalorians are. That's where he runs it. And they go to this planet where, you know, he finds Bo-Katan and the other two. And, you know, ultimately she's, you know, he says to her, hey, I'm looking for Jedi. Do you know where I can find one? and she says, yeah, we know where you can find one, but you're going to have to help us with something first. And then he helps them attack a former Empire weapons carrier and to steal a bunch of weapons that they will in turn then use to, you know, fight back and get the Darksaber and, take their fight to reclaiming Mandalore. But toward the end of the episode, it also leads to us finding out that the Jedi that they're aware of is none other than the one we've been waiting for, Ahsoka Tano.
It was one of the coolest, you know, things. That's pretty much how like the episode wraps up essentially with that tease, because you had so many cool like moments in the show. You like when Bo-Katan lands, right? Because you could just tell by her Mandalorian helmet if you watch Clone Wars, like, oh, that's her. You don't even need her mask off to see like, you know, red hair and all that stuff to be like, oh, that's her. That, and then when she says she's looking for the Darksaber, you're like, oh snap, Moff Gideon's got it. She's gonna go after him. And then when she tells Mando, she's like, yeah, we know where you can find a Jedi to bring the child. Go to this girl, Ahsoka Tano. So it was just so freaking awesome. There was like amazing. 3 major beats. We're like, oh my God. Or then how about even when like on that ship where the Mando is thinking he's being brought to other Mandalorians, they kick Baby Yoda into like that pit where that sea monster thing is, and he gets swallowed by it. So then he jumps in there. That whole setup was dope because you're like, oh, how's he going to get out of this? And then out of nowhere, you just see other Mandalorians flying in on their jetpacks doing like freaking twists and bicycle kicks in the air. It's freaking awesome.
Yeah, and how much fun is it also just watching the Mandalorians fly around together?
So cool. So
Dude,
the special effects in this freaking show, man.
Crazy.
Like movie level special effects.
Yeah, it's just so good. And every week, during the gap between episodes 2 and 3, I talked to a couple of people that were also complaining about how episode 2 was, kind of a filler episode or whatever. And I'm just like, get over yourself. It's like, okay, fine. That's your opinion. I enjoyed it. But this episode was absolutely not a filler episode. It was fun from start to finish. We got introduced to Bo-Katan, a couple other Mandalorians, and we got the tease for the introduction of potentially Ahsoka Tano in episode 4 here that's dropping actually today as we're recording this episode. So I am super curious to see if we get her pretty early in the episode in episode 4, or if this leads to another episode and we get her teased at the end, or she appears at the end leading into episode 5. I can't believe that we're already halfway through the season. It's kind of like making me depressed a little bit, because I wish this was like a 15 episode season. But also the fact that we are 3 episodes in and we still have not seen the Darksaber yet.
No, but Gideon finally showed up in episode 3, so we know it's about to go down. Yeah, briefly talking to some people over comms, but it's about to go down, which, I mean, it's going to be very, very fun. Now, my guess, episode 4 is currently out as of this morning while we're currently recording this right now, but obviously neither of us have seen it, and it's directed by Carl Weathers. So my guess is they're going to skip this week with Ahsoka. Maybe a small tease at the very end, a cliffhanger. But next week's episode 5, is directed by Dave Filoni. So I think that episode is going to be the one where we really get Ahsoka, because who better to freaking direct the episode with Ahsoka Mandalorians than Dave Filoni, the co-creator of Ahsoka and the guy who probably knows the most about Mandalorians on this planet. You know what I mean?
And that's what I told my kids, because my kids were all excited. They're like, oh my gosh, Ahsoka's going to be in this episode. This episode's going to be about Ahsoka. I said, don't get your hopes up. I was like, if I had to guess, my guess would be that this episode would be its own story. It would, expand on other things, potentially give us a little bit about the Darksaber, but that Ahsoka would appear right at the end of the episode. Whether she saves him, comes in and saves the day or something like that, or she just steps out of the shadows and it's a tease leading us into episode 5. That's my guess, but we will see soon enough.
Can I just say too, like, how they've kept Rosario Dawson under wraps as Ahsoka this whole time? Like, they haven't released an image, nothing, nada, zilch, nothing's leaked. And it's about to happen here, maybe tonight we'll get the first glimpse of her, maybe next week. But it's going to happen by the end of December, no matter what, because that's when the series is going to come to an end. So within a month here, we're going to see her, and we have nothing. Not a teaser. We haven't even seen what her lightsaber looks like live action. Nothing.
It is pretty incredible. I have to imagine that the pandemic helped them out on that front, because there's been, the year has been so crazy. Yeah. I imagine that's helped, because if you noticed, there was not a lot that leaked this year at all. No. About almost anything.
But they did such a good job with the child, even, in 2019. Like, no one had a clue. That's true. They didn't even have freaking merchandise. They're like, no, this is like one of the most low-key things we're ever going to do. Boom, there's the bomb. Everyone enjoy.
I think some of that too was before The Mandalorian came out. I think that people were there was a lot of Star Wars fans were really down on Star Wars. And so people were just kind of assuming this wasn't going to be that good, and they weren't going to, not everyone obviously, but a lot of people, I think, especially OG Star Wars fans, were just kind of the opinion of like, this is just going to be like all the rest of the stuff that we don't like. And boy, were they wrong.
Well, I heard an interview with Filoni for the first season where he said him and Favreau actually went to Lucas and Disney marketing and were like, hey, can you please keep this a secret? Can we, because that was unprecedented. Like, merchandise is one of the biggest things, because that's, what brings in a lot of money, a lot of times more so than the actual film or show. So they're like, come on, we really think. And Favreau was able to convince them, and that's why there was no merchandise ready, which is crazy because they're like, if you make merchandise, images are going to leak of toys, of blankets, whatever you put the child on. So we need you to hold off on merchandise until after the first episode drops, which is crazy.
I mean, can you think of the last thing merchandise wise that was this huge for Star Wars? I mean, in terms of like the child and Mandalorian, dude, even like both.
Dude, this year too, like I'm thinking of getting my daughter a Baby Yoda. They have an animatronic one that's like $90 now. Like it talks, it puts its hand out, it blinks, its ears move, and I'm like, because she's obsessed with Baby Yoda, and there's so many options to choose from plushes to little vinyl figures to the animatronic one to the friggin' 400 sideshow collectibles one that you have. So there's so much merchandise, it's insane.
It really is, and it's only just beginning. Like we're just at the early stages of, because remember,
we're gonna be Baby Yoda out.
Yeah, when the first show came out, you remember how long we were like, I can't believe there's not Baby Yoda stuff everywhere.
Months.
Yeah, it was months and months and months. It was like, I cannot believe they weren't ready in the wings with like just a pile of Baby Yoda, the child merch and Mandalorian merch. We got a little bit of Mandalorian stuff, but overall, even Mandalorian, just the for the show in general, there wasn't that much. So I don't know if they were just, hey, let's be like really conservative about, you know, how much we produce up front until we see how this thing's going to perform, because of, you know, the way that things had gone with the last previous trilogy rather. And because, you know, regardless of what, you know, whether you liked the movies or not, the merchandise for the trilogy did not sell well for Disney overall. You know, as collectors and people that are, you know, in that market, you and I both know there was a lot of stuff that just didn't move at all. And there was, you know, comic shops and toy stores that were complaining like, hey, this stuff isn't moving very well.
Because they didn't have you know, much of any of all the like the legacy characters that all of Star Wars fans wanted. Yeah,
there wasn't a ton of buy-in. And even when the stuff they did with the legacy characters, people really didn't dig. So nobody wanted to buy the old man Luke Skywalker because they didn't like what they did with him. Nobody wanted to buy the old, you know, the old man Han Solo because they didn't like, you know, the way they offed him. You know, for a myriad of reasons, this stuff just didn't. And then there wasn't as much buy-in with the new characters. So, you know, just across the board. So I think maybe they were trying to be, and obviously we don't know this for sure, but, you know, it's possible that maybe they were trying to be conservative with, you know, what they put out and when, until they knew for sure that they had a hit on their hands. But man, they sure do.
Well, they definitely have a hit on their hands now. And apparently they're going to start filming in December, season 3.
That's right.
There's rumors though, that they've already been filming in secret the Boba Fett miniseries, and that they're literally just going to go right from that straight into season 3 of The Mandalorian.
Bring it on. Bring it on.
So, I mean, the Filoniverse, as us fans have dubbed it, is in full mother freaking swing. And I can't be more excited. I feel like we say it every single podcast, or at least every time we talk about Star Wars. Just give it all to Favreau and Filoni. Just give it to them. Let them head everything, and you will have gold.
Yeah, I couldn't. We say that over and over and over again. But the reason that it's like, for me, I guess it's
right
kinda,
there.
It's just tough.
It's just they're already using them.
So obvious. It's so obvious. Look, man, you just made like a whole trilogy, and you got a whole bunch of, you know, some people liked it. I am not in any way saying that everybody hated it. Like, a lot of people really loved it. I have some of my kids, my daughter, loved the first trilogy, or the last trilogy rather. But there was a lot of people, especially OG Star Wars fans, that had issues with it. And it had some real pushback from the fan base. Well, The Mandalorian is the 180-degree opposite, where it's literally telling Disney, hey, these guys understand what Star Wars is and what the fans of Star Wars believe Star Wars is. And they're giving them that. They're introducing new characters, taking the stories in new directions, while simultaneously staying true to the heart of the universe. And that was the problem with the last trilogy. They didn't really do a good job with that, in a lot of people's opinion, is they introduced new characters, but they didn't really do a good job of staying true to the heart of the Star Wars universe as a whole. Mandalorian is the 180-degree opposite of that. So if you're seeing that and you're seeing those results, dude, you don't have nobody. I'm not even saying like get rid of Kathleen Kennedy and have Kathleen Kennedy just put those guys in place and say, hey, okay, you guys are going to be, you're going to work with me and you're going to work with me to steer the ship in this direction, or I'm going to give you a trilogy or whatever. She's
working with someone on The Mandalorian because she heads up anything at Lucasfilm.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
But I'm saying broaden that scope. Like put them in charge of, at bare minimum, it's like, why don't you just give them all the Disney Plus series and let them oversee the direction of that?
I think that's what they're doing, hence the Filoni-verse, because they, all the series that are developing right now, Obi-Wan, Ahsoka, Boba Fett, and obviously The Mandalorian, like they're all, like Filoni and crew have their hands all in it. So I think that's kind of where they're headed.
We think. We don't know.
Yeah, nothing is officially confirmed, but there's a lot of rumor. It's kind of like those rumors that are like, obviously it's still a rumor, but it's like, yeah, it's more than likely going to turn out to be true. It's like one of those things.
I hope
so.
What I mean? And that's, again, like as fans, that's what we're hoping. We're hoping that turns out to be the case. And if it does, that means that we're in for some really great Star Wars content on Disney Plus for the foreseeable future. Across the board.
Yeah, I'm curious to, to get in Favreau's head, because we know Filoni, he's been, Star Wars has been his life through and through for like, over a decade here, maybe more. So we know this is him. He's going to stay with, Lucasfilm and Star Wars probably forever, right? But Favreau, he's a creative guy. He's done tons of amazing movies. He kicked off, the MCU with the first Iron Man, Elf, you know what I mean? Zathura. He's done tons of amazing movies. He's a great director. Yeah. So I'm wondering how long he'll want to play with the Star Wars characters before he's satisfied and then creatively wants to do something else. You know what I mean? Like, is he the guy who'll be like, yeah, I'll give you guys like, 10 years of my life and then do something else. You know what I mean?
Yeah. I guess I would look at it I would base it on what he's done with Marvel, right? He spent over a decade with Marvel building that universe up.
Well, he did the first 2 Iron Man movies, and then he executive produced a lot of the movies behind the scenes and starred as Happy Hogan in a lot of the films.
Yep. But he also worked directly with Feige in a large capacity in the general direction and building up of that overall franchise. Because again, he played such a huge role in kicking it off.
He kicked it off. Yeah, he literally kicked it off. Yeah.
Yeah. So he played such a huge role, and it's just he was very quietly behind the scenes a huge part of turning Marvel into what it became.
Let's get Favreau on the show. Let's get him on the next podcast. Let's get this lined up.
Yeah, absolutely. Bring him on. Give us the scoop. But yeah, so based on the fact that he clearly enjoys these genres. He clearly is a fan. I mean, and then based on what we're seeing from him with Star Wars and The Mandalorian, it's just as strong of a love for him as Marvel, if not maybe more so. So based on that, my guess would be if they offered it to him and said, hey, we really want you to come in and take a trilogy or, just oversee the direction of the Star Wars universe or play a creative lead role in all of it. I would have to imagine that he would jump all over that, because you're talking about his legacy in the end. He would go from the guy who wrote and directed Swingers to the guy who helped build the Marvel Cinematic Universe and righted the ship for the Star Wars universe franchise with Disney.
He's definitely seems at home to be with Disney, as both Star Wars and Marvel are Disney properties. So
not to mention the live action remakes that he's done are some of the biggest they've ever made with Jungle Book and The Lion King.
No, that's what I'm saying. He's the guy. Like, he is one of the easily. He's easily one of the hottest directors of the last, several years.
Without question.
I mean, again, just Elf alone, right? Like that's already a timeless classic Christmas movie. Like that's my top 3 Christmas movies of all time. So,
without a doubt.
And he's got a ton of things under his belt. It's crazy. And, he's a good actor too. So very talented man, big nerd. So I hope he sticks with Star Wars, forever, because he's doing a really good job. It's like, seeing from what Disney did with the original trilogy to this, it's like, yeah, you found your guy. Just keep him and let him do everything. Like, again, just let him be the Feige. Him and Filoni, just let them head up and oversee everything and keep the content, because Feige's the continuity guy, right? He's the guy who just knows if everything's going to work, what's going to line up. And then you have Favreau, who he's the guy who, another massive creative, but an amazing director and producer. Yep. So he could make it all work, like cinematically. So it's like, they're Batman and Robin, literally Batman and Robin. Just keep them on this forever.
Yeah, it is such a good 1-2 punch with Filoni having such a deep knowledge and understanding of the Star Wars mythology and history of all of these characters.
He's got a true love.
Planets. True
I mean,
love. It's like it would border on obsession with as far as like his knowledge and his knowledge base of the whole thing. But then you've got Favreau as the counter, where he's not just a great writer, he's not just a great director, he's a really cerebral creative, where he thinks very deeply about these storylines. And that's what like geekdom really needs, right? We've talked about that many times, where we need people who love these characters, they love these stories, they love these universes, whether we're talking about Star Wars or a comic universe, but they approach it from in a serious way. Right? Not to remake it or reshape it in a way that appeals to their artistic sensibilities, but they want to stay true to what it is, but they have some really good ideas and they think about it very seriously of like, well, if this happened with this particular character based on who we know they are, then we could, it could go in this direction and this direction. And they think about it deeply and broadly. And that makes for great storytelling and has always been where we have seen the best results in any of the universes that we love when they come to live action, whether it's television or a film. For sure. Yeah. I mean, I feel like we just drool over the Mandalorian every time we talk. We're like, people are like, you're such fanboys. Yes.
It's so good.
Guilty as charged. It's fantastic.
It's just, I don't have a bad thing to say about it. And there's very few properties out there right now that I have like zero complaints. You know what I mean? Because I think also, because we always talk about how good the effects are, but a part of the charm is too, like, there's some effects that like aren't necessarily so good, but it's on purpose, right? Because it's keeping that old Star Wars charm of like the puppetry and stuff like that, where it's like, yeah, clearly it's a puppet and someone's like moving it, but that's what gives you that Star Wars feel. That's what we grew up with. And they found a perfect balance of the practical stuff with like, the super realistic CGI stuff. Yeah, they've done a fantastic job. We have nothing but love. We know a lot of you guys have nothing but love for the show. When the child runs, when they showed the child running, I believe in episode 2, he's like scooting. I was like, it looks so bad, but it's so good. Yeah, it's so great. It's so great. All right, but now I guess let's on to the main event, right? DC's death metal. That's the big topic of today, as DC is continuing to shift into what's ultimately going to be their new continuity and the new DC going into 2021. That's right. We've been talking about this. I feel like we've been following this for what? Almost 2 years now, a year and a half, around there? Easily, yeah. Easily. So, but death metal, Scott Snyder even took to Twitter about a week or so ago. He posted a picture of the cover for issue 5 of death metal saying, the continuity and road to 2021 starts here, is essentially what he posted. I'm paraphrasing, but that's basically what he said. And he did not lie. he did not lie. Issue 5 gives some big revelations. Now, we will say spoilers for the entirety of this issue and just death metal in general. Because death metal as a whole. Yeah, death metal as a whole, because there's no way to avoid spoilers for what we're going to talk about. So for the death metal Rise of the New God one-shot, we were introduced so the Omniverse. There's a character called the Chronicler, and he's going around bringing freaking Metron, the new god, back to life, and they basically have a conversation where it's very much like the creatives and writers of DC talking to us. You know what I mean? Saying like, hey, these characters, even though they may change or disappear, will live on in other forms and stuff like that. Pretty much being like, hey, no matter what happens to our comics, if we reduce our count or not, we still got like other forms like video games, cartoons, movies, yada, yada, yada. Saying, whatever happens, you'll always remember us. There's always going to be the back issues. There's always going to be the old stories. You can never take away what has already been. So we've been seeing like this trend through a lot of their one-shots. And then, with Death Metal issue 5, it kind of solidified what the Omniverse is, because they introduced the Omniverse in that Rise of the New God one-shot, but they didn't really explain what it was, because an Omniverse, at least in Marvel, is like all the universes, right? Where it's just like every fictional universe is how it's kind of been explained. But DC's Omniverse is different, so we didn't really know how it was going to work, because it's not, something that's necessarily real, so you could make your own rules. So that's what DC did. So their Omniverse is broken down in Death Metal 5, and it's explained to us by Lex Luthor, which is
of all people.
Yeah, of all people, he is back. Because if you've been reading Death Metal or watching our videos covering every issue, you know that Lex hired Lobo to collect 10th Metal or Element X. And we find out the reason for that in this issue. So essentially, basically, he's collecting this metal because with it, he could make a machine that basically tells the truth or unleashes the truth onto all of DC and all of its characters, which is kind of like a metaphor for saying, hey, we're going to let because they say it in the comic, we're going to let all the characters know with this machine, once you make it and activate it, everything that's ever happened, like the real truth, everything that's been hidden from you from every crisis event, every reboot, every death. We're going to let you, once this machine works, you're going to understand everything that happened. Everything, hence the whole thing that everything matters, everything happened, right? Like that's their omniverse. There's going to be no more crisis events. Everything happened, right? Which is crazy, which is really, really weird. And it asks, there's a lot of questions still to be answered. Not everything is answered here. Like, how will that work? Because if everything mattered and this person died, then how are they still alive? Like, it's kind of weird with the omniverse, I guess. You could explain, well, there's multiple universes and yada, yada, yada. But like, how is it all going to be streamlined in one continuity? And I'm not sure there is going to be a streamlined continuity anymore. Again, we don't know yet, but like, from what they're saying, it's almost like, how could you even do that? You know what I mean? So unless they explain it some weird way in future issues, you know, that's what I'm assuming currently. It seems from what they're saying, like once they activate this machine and everything matters, everything happened, it's like, okay, so that means we're just going to continue to have alternate versions of people. So is that going to make more Earths? Is everything just going to be like one-offs like in the real world? Because in the real world, you know, there's been rumors that DC might actually just start doing one-off stories that's not in one streamlined continuity anymore, which being a continuity junkie and following these characters forever would be extremely disappointing. Like, I'm sure, you know, a lot of my favorite stories are one-off or in their own universe, like, you know, Deceased and, you know, the Elseworlds in general, because, you know, everyone who's been watching the show for a while knows I love alternate versions and Elseworld stories. But it's the main continuity, you know what I mean? That's the only reason all that stuff exists, is because you have the main streamlined version of all these characters, and that needs to stay in place. So I would be bummed that that's where they go. But let's just read here what Lex says and then kind of break it down from there, because it's you know, it's a lot to unpack. He basically explains it to Wonder Woman by telling her what crisis energy is and what anti-crisis energy is. So
it is important that we read it to be exact, because it is starting. We're getting to that place because of what they're doing with the story as a whole, where it's starting to get convoluted. Right, as these things tend to do, and it's reaching that point where you're really having to try and start to say, okay, you know, what are they doing here? Where is this going? And it's getting interesting
for sure. So after after Lex tells the rest of the League and Wonder Woman about this machine he wants them to build with metal X shards, Wonder Woman goes, I don't understand. This machine, it will help us redirect crisis energy to use it so we could fight him, referring to the one who laughs. And he's like, no, we are all the batteries for crisis energy and its opposite. Crisis energy is born of our fears, our anger, our desire to be big. It invites us to change history to make the present more important. He then goes on to say, but anti-crisis energy is connective. It unites people through memory and history, reminding us we are small but part of one epic story. Build my machine and use it to unknot the timeline and restore everyone's memories. In doing so, you will connect us to the truth and create a powerful stream of anti-crisis energy you might be able to use to fight him. So that there's a lot just in like those little bits of dialogue to unpack right there. Because he's explaining how crisis energy and how anti-crisis energy works, but he's also explaining how the continuity is going to work going forward. Because, you know, if the anti-crisis energy brings back all the memories and all the history and showing how that all these characters are just one piece to a bigger puzzle, and they bring all their memories back, that means continuity is clearly going to change. If you're remembering everything that's ever happened, every crisis, all these characters' deaths, you're just saying, oh, in using this to fight them, you're bringing back everything we lost and don't remember, and it's just going to reset everything, and now everything matters, everything happened. So it's a clever way for Scott Snyder and DC to be like, hey guys, we're resetting this soon. So
hi everybody.
Things are about to change in 2021.
and this doesn't even touch on, because a lot of these stepping stones that led us even to this point Obviously everything has been stepping stones leading us to this point.
Right.
But in terms of like these big reveals that we're getting now, it really kicked off with Rise of the New God.
Yes.
That is where we really started seeing this tone shift, where you started getting a direct, and we addressed it in our recent episode where we covered the issue, but that's where you really started seeing this tonal shift, and you start to realize, oh, this isn't just a crisis event. This is something much bigger. They're addressing, and yes, it is speculative to some degree because it has not been confirmed by DC or any of the creators, but it's starting to look pretty dang obvious that this is the creators' way of addressing what is happening at DC Entertainment, DC Publishing, as a whole, between the corporate side of things with AT&T and Warner Brothers, and the actual creators of DC and what's, the fan base and the love of these characters and these universes and these stories. That is where it really started shifting, is in the Rise of the New God story.
Yeah, the New God story literally introduced the concept of DC's Omniverse with that new character, the Chronicler, who like comes in to like write down all the history in these universes to keep it in the greater Omniverse. So it's really really interesting. And then after Lex says this to Wonder Woman, she's like, but I used anti-crisis energy against Perpetua last time and it didn't work. Crisis energy was more powerful, like by far. And he's like, no, it wasn't. No, it wasn't. And she's like, oh, you're right. I remember she taunted me. She told me if I won using anti-crisis energy, everything would be brought bare. Like all history would matter, time would unknot, and many of us would be dead. Again, bringing back, bringing everything back. Like kind of like again, I keep saying it, but the best way to explain this is like everything happened. You know what I mean? Everything mattered is pretty much what they're doing, which is like the greater Omniverse. Because like, yeah, everything exists. That story, yeah, it happened. This TV show, yeah, it happened. You know what I mean? Because I feel like it even goes beyond the comic books. I feel like with what they're trying to do and how they're trying to make the DCEU all connective, having freaking, Ezra Miller Flash appear in the Grant Gustin Flash show, I feel like they're trying to connect everything. So everything links and everything's in this Omniverse. And if they want to, they could jump from this to that and this to that and say, oh, that happened here because this happened there. You know what I mean? I feel like they just want this kind of to do whatever they want now and not have to be bound to like, well, that won't line up with the main continuity. So with the Omniverse, they're like, yeah, but everything matters. Everything can happen. Yeah, I mean, it perfectly lines up with everything that we have been honestly speculating about, based on, the things that we had been hearing behind the scenes regarding DC, but also, just the moves they've been making. I.e., earlier, was it earlier this year or was it last year? I can't even remember. So many things all just blends together. I believe it was earlier this year when Jim Lee, was at, I think it was C2E2 actually. Oh, right. That was early
portions of the year. Yeah. Before everything went bonkers. And he was attempted to address some of the things that were being discussed, including on this show. And he just rambled off a whole bunch of corporate speak, and it was a lot of like, oh, we've been around for this long and we're hoping to be around for this long. And, that sort of a thing. And we said then, and, I believed very strongly that, it's not what he said, it's what he didn't say here that is really telling. And a lot of the stuff that we're now seeing them do in this story, we're seeing them line up with Future State, and a lot of the things that are happening with the layoffs and so forth at DC is really starting to put all the puzzle pieces in place to confirm the things that we were speculating at the time based on what was happening last year and earlier this year, which is that, the corporate body that is AT&T, and then that funnels down to Warner Brothers and then ultimately to DC Entertainment. But this is a money issue. AT&T does not see the value in continuing to publish comics. They see the value for if they're going to own this brand and they're going to be expending capital, then they want it to be a profit machine for them. And the greatest way to make it a profit machine for them and to help them reduce their overall debt load, which is the problem for them. They have about still they're over 150. Well, I think it's around $150 billion in debt. Which is massive for any company. Right. And so for them to maximize that profitability, you know, what better way to do it than cut all the overhead or as much as physically possible. You have these long-standing properties that have been around for, 80 plus years, and you can just exploit all the myriads of backstories and, creative concepts that have been built up around these characters in this universe for literally decades and decades, and just make money off that with very little overhead, even possibly licensing out the characters to other publishers to where none of the overhead is in-house. It's just pure capital, pure profit.
I will say, recently, because both of us know a lot of people behind the scenes who work with these publishers at this publisher. We just know, we know people in the industry, right? We've been doing, the show for years and years and years and stuff like that. So you become to know a lot of people working with them over the years. Anyway, I will say, this is a rumor. A little birdie told me what I'm about to say is not definitive for everyone listening. All I will say is a little birdie told me, who is in that circle, who is behind the scenes, that rumor has it that DC is looking to go digital mid next year. So it almost seems like it's a rollout, like it's a process. They're like, okay, first we're just going to go mainly completely digital. See how much money that saves us. If it still doesn't, then we'll start reducing titles and still be digital. And they're basically doing it in phases. So so DC Future State 2 is apparently very dependent on what the future of DC is going to be. They need it to be super successful, because if not, that's going to determine what's getting the axe, what's staying, what's not. So a lot kind of hinges from what birdies have said on DC Future State and how publishing is going to grow out. Now, I will say at the same time, this little birdie also said that the DC is not going away. Like, behind the scenes, comics are actually this year.
Yeah.
But behind the scenes, comics are actually doing really well this year, more so than ever, because of everything going on. A lot of people have extra time. They're buying. So sales are actually doing really good for the comic book industry as a whole. So all those naysayers you see out there like, the industry is going to explode, blah, blah. No. That's not what's happening. What's happening here is things are changing. We're going to get our comics in a new way. Sure, maybe we're not going to get 50 DC titles anymore. Maybe we'll get like 20 or something like that. And maybe they'll be digital. But as for the stories themselves, they're still going to exist. It's just maybe a reduction of that and the way we get those comics. So it's still a big shock for sure, especially for like print comics and the comic shop side of things. But, it seems like, from all this stuff that we got things in phases here. So, we're not going to know what's really going to be what, it seems, till like mid to end of 2021.
Yeah. I mean, look, man, none of this is a surprise. I mean, literally, we have been talking about this stuff on this show for a year, a literal year. And none of it is a surprise. You could see it coming a mile away. And even earlier this year, when the pandemic, kicked off and all the lockdowns began, and you began to see a lot of economic difficulties sprout up for small businesses all over the country. There was no question about whether or not the comic book industry was going to survive, right? We knew it was going to survive, but the main thing that we talked about was this is going to be a kick in the pants in the direction of moving digital. Yeah. Right. That DC, we weren't sure when something I think we should have saw as more of a telling move than we did, I think. Was when they untethered themselves from Diamond. Yeah. As a distributor, right? We were like, oh, they're being smart and they're going their own route and they're breaking up, and this was true. We're like, this is a monopoly that should have been broken up a long time ago. It never should have been allowed to get to this. And we just viewed it as DC. Okay, DC's making moves. They're being smart. And in reality, what we really should have realized is like, okay, this actually aligns perfectly with everything else we've already been talking about as far as them downsizing, going digital, reducing overhead in the maximum way possible, while continuing to create and exploit previous content and the individual IPs. Yeah. So it all lines up perfectly. And I actually just was on a phone call a little bit earlier today where we were talking about, DC. And, one of the things we actually discussed and that I had mentioned was that I believed that we were going to see DC go all digital within the next 12 months.
Well, a lot of people got to remember too, back in the New 52, back in 2011, 2012, when Jim Lee was, promoted to, co-publisher and stuff along with Dan DiDio, at the time, co-publishers, we had Dan DiDio running the publishing side of things, the actual print, and Jim Lee was heading up the digital side of the things. Jim Lee is actually one of the biggest reasons why DC went, to Comixology and digital and, in general. He was a big push for like, guys, this is like the future. We need to get on this platform. Like this is going to get, more readers now, because not everyone's going to go to a comic shop this way. Anyone has access to it on a phone, tablet, computer. So, and he's the only guy left. Not saying Jim Lee's the only component pushing this. I'm just saying it kind of makes sense that, he was the one, heading that side of things. He's the one left. And with everything going on in digital, all things digital, not just comic books, in this pandemic, like, brick and mortar, sadly, is struggling really hard right now in all aspects of life, whether it's grocery store, mom and pop shops, obviously comic book shops. So, but while digital, the Amazons of the world, the Googles of the world are thriving because everyone's buying stuff online. You're even getting your video games. You're just downloading it, on your Xbox, just everything. So it makes sense to, first, before they just give everything the axe, they're like, okay, well, let's one at a time. If we just go digital, that's going to save a ton of overhead because now you're talking about print costs, distribution, like all that stuff is gone off the bat. That's going to save them millions just by going digital. So, if that rumor is true, which it seems likely, especially just in the evolution, we've been talking about this forever. I use this analogy all the time, but music, a perfect freaking example. Like, remember we would get CDs, cassette tapes, record players, throughout the decades, and now everyone just listens to music on their phone, digital. Everything's digital. MP3s, MP4s. Right. Yeah. So it's like, it only makes sense, not saying, you're never going to have your print, but eventually the majority of pretty much everything, not just comic books, is going to be digital. It's already happened with movies. There's still a big collector market out there for the steelbooks and Blu-rays, but come on, streaming is way more convenient. And I would, bet that most people would prefer just pulling a movie up, on demand or Netflix or Disney Plus or whatever, because it's just easy. You don't have to worry about the disc. You don't have to worry about the space. You just click 2 buttons and it's playing. And it's always there. You could pull it up on your phone. You could pull it up on your computer. So it makes sense. It's sad though. It's really, really sad. It's making me cry inside because I don't, comic books, it's print. Part of the hobby is going to these stores, smelling the paper, holding the books, looking at the toys there, seeing other titles you wouldn't see otherwise on the shelf if you weren't at a comic book shop. So it's sad. It's really sad. It
is. And that kind of touches on like the next big aspect of all of this, right? Because DC is one of the big two, right? That the comic book shops absolutely 100% depend upon to be publishing books regularly for them to be able to survive and thrive. And we commented on this a few times again earlier this year about what comic books stores and shops are going to have to do to be able to move into the next phase of the comic book industry and survive it. They are going to have to adapt, and one of the first things they're going to have to do is really emphasize the interactive community aspect of that, especially if we are going to continue to see a reduction in in-person events like Comic-Cons, right? And if we see that trend, continue to expand. It happened this entire year basically got canceled, as everyone knows.
No,
but if you weren't paying attention, or if you weren't living on planet Earth, if that trend extends into 2021, man, companies will have no choice but to adapt and change the way they're doing things. And once companies change structurally, they don't go backwards. Not very often.
I mean, another sign to the points we're trying to make here too is the DC Universe app, right? Initially, it was your place for all things DC, movies, TV shows, comics, everything. Just you could stream TV shows, movies, read comics on there. Now, because HBO Max, all of the videos and all the movies and the cartoons and TV shows are eventually going to end up at HBO Max. Most of them are on there already. Right. And DC recently announced that DC Universe app is now just going to be solely for their digital comic books. It's their place to go for digital comics, which that was not by accident. They're like, hey, we're going to need a place to put all this stuff. We're going to need a reason for people to be spending money on this. So, hey, what if they're like, hey, keep spending the $10 a month, whatever it is, and you'll get all our new digital stuff like a month after initial release on Comixology or other digital platforms, and then you'll be able to read them on here. So, again, Marvel's had a digital platform for years and years, and it seems like this is going to be DC's version, but the timing of it seems very convenient.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah, and this is going to push Marvel in the same direction.
Oh, for sure.
It's going to push Marvel. And again, just going back to the comic book shops and the overall effect it's going to have on the industry. If we don't see, the in-person, comic book shops adapt quickly, and I mean quickly, right? Because we're already seeing so many of them go out of business, shut down. It really is. It's heartbreaking, especially for those of us who love that community element of, the comic book, the local comic book shop, right? It's not just about being able to go and pick up the comic book and buy it. That's an element of it, but there's a much bigger aspect to, the community of geekdom, right? Of the comic book community, where we can come together and kind of talk shop and joke with one another and, a myriad of things.
For sure.
Right?
It's like, hey, did you check out what happened?
It's going to eliminate all that.
Yeah. It's like, hey, did you see what happened to Hal Jordan? It's like, no, I'm not reading Green Lantern. Oh, so you should totally read the Green Lantern comic book. It's like all that kind of stuff.
Exactly.
Or even like comic shops, they're called comic shops and, they're comic shops, but they have games there, action figures, posters, everything in that nerd realm. Then you discover other things. So it's plus what comic fan doesn't like going through back issues looking to be like, oh, I had this. It's only $5. I'm going to pick this up. You know what I mean? So it's like, it's really, really sad. But going back to death metal, because going back to how their continuity is going to change and, how this may set all that in motion if all that turns out to be true, Wonder Woman tells them, guys, I was wrong to think we could use crisis energy to restart the multiverse. Whatever reality we made, no matter how bright, would be built out of desire to control its shape. We can't restart everything our way, and we can't go back to the past. Instead, we will unknot the rope and everything will matter. Good, bad, and as uncertain as it might be, we will greet the new future with hope. So, that right there is saying, like, they're not going to reboot. That's another thing. It's like they're getting rid of crisis events in DC. They're like, guys, we're not going to be rebooting things anymore. Like with this Omniverse, everything matters. So I hope you like the path we're on. Which makes
total sense.
Yeah. I hope you like the path we're on, or we're going to start in 2021 because we're not going to keep changing things like every year or every 2 years with a crisis and keep rebooting, which was a joke in the comic book community. It's like, how many times is Marvel and DC going to be rebooting? It's like every other year you had a reboot. So it's a catch-22. Yeah. It's like, awesome. Continuity is not going to be convoluted anymore because we're not going to have to explain how this matters, but that doesn't matter. But at the same time, if you don't like what they're doing, you're stuck. You know what I mean? It's like maybe you could jump over to something else that's not in that continuity, if continuity is even a thing. Again, that hasn't really been explained. But in the grand scheme of things, as of now, as of issue 5 of Death Metal, what this is telling me, what I'm pulling from this is, you better like what we're doing because we're not going to keep rebooting.
Yeah, I mean, it's like a duh kind of a little bit, right? Because if the idea is like, hey, we're getting rid of continuity, period, because we have no idea what comics we are and are not going to be able to publish 6 months from now, right? If that's the direction, well, then obviously, and this is, again, we talked about this just a few podcasts ago, where it's like you have to get rid of a lot of characters.
It's so sad.
You've got to get rid of a whole, I mean, literally 75%, if not maybe more, of your overall superhero universe has got to be completely discontinued. It's got to be cut off. And then you have to create your storylines in such a way. You have to get the storylines to a place, to where it's satisfactory for the fans, to where they feel like this was part of a journey in some way. But also get it to the place where now we can tell the stories that we want to tell and how we want to tell them, which is like nothing matters, right? It's just whatever story we want to tell, and it all counts, it all matters. And that makes sense to fans in some way, shape, or form. But I think the most telling aspect of this, and this comes with a question that I have that I kind of want to put out to you, is that this, starting with the Rise of the New God, right? The dialogue started to feel like a farewell letter from the creators. This started to feel like a bit of it's been fun. This has been great. It's not going in it. We will always remember the time we had. It's like we'll always have Paris, right?
Yeah.
You know what I mean? It's starting to feel like a love letter, a farewell. Thanks for coming along with us with the ride. It all still matters. This all still happened. You know what I mean? That's what it's starting to feel like. Starting again in the Rise of the New God. And the question I have for you is looking at this. We talked about this a little bit a week ago or so. Looking at this and kind of going through what they're doing now, seeing the dialogue and seeing the story, where the story has gone. Where do you if these are all these characters now, right, are representatives of different pieces of the comic book industry, DC as a whole, us, the readers and the fan base, etc. Who do you think each character is supposed to represent?
It's crazy, man. Like the Chronicler very much seemed like the Chronicler and Metron kind of seem like. Well, Metron definitely is like the fans, like the writers, it seems like. The Metron is the writer. Like, they're the creatives. Yeah. Because he's the one talking to the fans, being like, hey, don't worry. We'll always have the past. We'll always have backstories. We'll have other forms of media. And the Chronicler...
I agree.
The Chronicler, I feel like, could be either the fans, like, trying to understand it, or for me, what I took away from it was kind of like the suits, like the CEOs, where it's like... Because you have Metron trying to explain all this... to the Chronicler being like, hey, look, it's beautiful and blah, blah, blah. And Metron's like, yeah. And he's slowly trying, kind of seeing like, oh, it is beautiful. Maybe I do want to save it. But on the, so you could kind of see him like the outside, like AT&T, like he's AT&T coming into DC and like, what are we going to do with this? But I could also see him being, like the fans in the sense where he's like, oh, this is so beautiful. All these, the characters are so colorful. We can't just let this die. We got to save this. You know what I mean? So, cause it's written very much where, it could be interpreted, a few different ways. But it's definitely, Metron for sure is definitely the creatives talking to us. They're like, hey guys, don't cry. Things are going to still be fine, just different. Maybe not the way you're used to it, but you're still going to get your heroes.
Yeah.
What about you?
I see it the same way. I guess I guess the next question I had for you is who do you think the Darkest Knight would be in all of this?
Who the Darkest Knight would be? Yeah. I guess he would actually be AT&T. It all burns. We're getting rid of it all.
Yeah. See, that is how I kind of saw it. Is I saw the Darkest Knight because I'm looking at this as like, okay, I'm a creative, right? I'm a creative. I'm a writer. I'm an artist, and I love these stories. I love these characters. I've been working on them and with them for many years. We've spent 80 plus years building out these universes and enjoying them and celebrating them together as a fan base, grew up with them, et cetera, right? And I'm looking at it as like, who would the Darkest Knight represent, right? Darkest Knight, Perpetua, these godlike characters that are just, manipulating and exploiting these, exploiting beautiful things, right? And these worlds, to reshape it, in his case, to reshape it in his image and the way he wanted it and how it'll benefit him. I'm looking at him like these villains, these monstrosities are these characters that would have to represent, the corporate side of things, of how a creative would see the corporate side. It's like you don't care about these things the same way that we do. You just want to use them. You want to
make that money.
Reshape them and you just want to reshape them and use them to benefit you. You want to reshape it into your image, which is just a money-making machine. It doesn't matter. These characters don't matter to you. None of these worlds matter to you, really. It's just about you and what you want, right? So that, for me, made a lot of sense. Although I do agree with you, there's aspects of the Chronicler where you're like, I could see, because, he's sent from the source.
Yes.
He's coming from outside.
He's the guy that like the companies hire to send in to fire everyone.
Yes, right. That element is definitely there. right? Where they're coming in. But I kind of saw it as like, well, what if that's supposed to be like Warner Brothers? Because remember, there's 3 tiers here.
Yes.
Right? You have Warner Brothers, you have AT&T, and then you have DC. But then you have DC Entertainment, and then you have DC Publishing, DC Collectibles, right?
Mm-hmm.
You have
we had
all
DC
these
Collectibles.
different. Yeah, we had
Unfortunately,
DC Collectibles,
RIP.
or DC Direct, yeah. But you have all of these different tiers of suits, and a lot of it has been corporatized. AT&T and freaking Warner Brothers has been for a long time.
Mm-hmm.
So it's like you could make an argument that The Darkest Night and Perpetua are AT&T and Warner Brothers, and then Chronicler is maybe people that have come in and have took over the lead roles at DC Entertainment for Warner Brothers.
Yeah, man.
You know what I mean? And we're trying to find a way like, hey, I was sent here from the source, which would be, a god, the corporate suits. And it's like, hey, how did this, because one of the pieces of dialogue that was like so telling and it made it harder for me to decide who the chronicler actually is supposed to represent is the part where he said, man, there's so much beauty here. This is a world of heroes.
Mm-hmm.
Like, how could it have gotten to this point? Is one of the lines of dialogue in there. It's like, how could it have gotten to this? How could it have come to this?
Yeah, he kind of wrote the line, right? That's like I was saying earlier. It's like you could interpret it both ways.
Exactly. So it's like, okay, well, that you could go either way. You could go the route of this is somebody on the DC Entertainment corporate side, that loves these characters and sees the beauty in it. But it's like, how did it get to this? How did it get to this convoluted, mess that we're in? And then you could easily also interpret that as you already said, as the fan base, us as the reader coming in and saying like, hey, there's so much beauty here.
Mm-hmm.
Why are we destroying this? So there's I think a number of,
it's going to make me cry.
You could go,
dude,
but it's such a fascinating, I really think this has become, I think, the most interesting aspect of this whole thing now. Whereas before we were talking about it in the sense of like, oh, this is a crisis event. And, we knew that this was setting up for whatever DC was ultimately going to do to transition out of the publishing comics.
But dude, they totally ninja'd us because it was like, the first like 2-3 issues of Death Metal, like you were just like, oh yeah, it's like metal. It's just another like crazy cosmic event. No, all of a sudden it shifted. And it's like, oh no, this is literally changing all continuity in DC. This is crisis level event. And this is literally from issue 5, this is the crisis event that's ending all crisis events. Like no more going forward.
And we can't forget, this is like a multi-year event that has been going on, with the Dark Knight.
Oh,
the Dark Knight event.
Yeah. But I always want,
right? Or the Dark Knights event.
I always wonder though, like we talked about with the 3 Joker storyline when we did an entire podcast on that. It's like, was this what it was always intended to be? Or did DC have to go to Snyder and be like, look, we need to shift gears a little bit and incorporate this and that. You know what I mean?
And it's going to be probably one of those things we won't know for a long while. If as things continue to evolve and continue, because there's NDAs out the wazoo at this point. But someday somebody's going to write a book and we'll get all the sordid details about what really went on during this whole situation. But as it's evolved, at first, like you said, they ninja'd us. We went from this, the Dark Knights event to, and it kind of just kept morphing and growing and building. And we got all these new characters out of it and all this kind of thing. And it was fun. And then we got into the Death Metal event and it was like, okay, this is crazy, but where are they going with all this? There's just so much happening. And then we started realizing this is a freaking crisis event, bro. This is a crisis event without saying it's a crisis 100%. Event. And then over the course of just a couple of months, it went from, holy crap, this is actually a crisis event happening here. They just haven't said it out loud to, oh, this is the crisis event to end all crisis events, to where we are now, which is, oh, this isn't just a crisis event. This is like a goodbye letter almost, right? Where this is clear. There's a ton of symbolism in here that we didn't even realize was happening right under our nose until we get to this stretch of dialogue. And now all of a sudden it's like, oh, light bulb.
That's what's making me so, nervous. Like the way that they're phrasing a lot of this dialogue for these characters, which is clearly intended to be talking to us, the fans. It's like, why are you saying it this way? Because you're very much like you said, like it's a goodbye, but it's like, but you're also saying in there, but like, don't worry, we're still going to be here. It's going to be fine. But then you're also saying, but things are changing. We're not going back. You know what I mean? So I'm like, I'm so conflicted. Am I happy? Am I sad? What should be my emotional state? Like, what do I have to feel right now? Like, so I'm just like worried, you know, because Future State, there's a lot of cool titles that look like that. And normally, under normal circumstances, I'd be like, yeah, it's going to last a year, maybe 2 tops, and everything's going to go back to normal. But now, after reading issue 5, where they're straight up saying, no. And again, it's comic books, right? Like, it's when someone dies, it's like, okay, they're going to come back. But this feels different, because this isn't just continuity. This, you're talking about the character saying this as literally the industry is changing. So it's way different than, like, killing Superman or, like, doing New 52, where it's like, yeah, it'll go back in 4 years. This is like, will it though? Like, everything's so up in the air, and I feel like it's going to be like that for the entirety of 2021, because it really just depends on sales, you know, what's selling, what's not, what's working, what's not. So, you know, things are very dependent on Future State, it seems, which has got me a little nervous, because I'm like, you know, what is it going to entail? Like, how drastically are you going to change these characters? Does that mean, like, with this new Wonder Woman, we're not going to have, you know, a Diana Wonder Woman? Like, what's going on here? What does this mean? You know? So, I'm going to be in a state of worry until January and these issues start dropping.
You know, honestly, I have moved past worry into, I'm just kind of the mindset of like, we're all of us as fans of DC, fans of even the comic book industry, we just really need to start wrapping our head around the fact that this industry that we love,
a change is coming.
We are in a very disruptive time across the board. This is not just the comic industry. This is a very disruptive time for a myriad of reasons.
Are you annoyed of the phrase, like, are you annoyed by now? Because it's been rightfully so, but it's used so often. It's like, oh, that's 2020 for you. It's like, yeah, we get it. Okay, 2020 sucks. I get it. Stop freaking twisting the knife.
I mean, I'm guilty. I freaking say that constantly at this point. It's just like, hey, thanks 2020. You know,
it's just like, again, it's like the Joker. He has his hand on the knife and he's just twisting it, and he's twisting it.
Yeah, I mean, but again, this was always coming. That's the thing, right? The pandemic situation only expedited certain things. It just kicked things that were already happening into a higher gear, to where it's, you know, now something that, you know, may have taken us 2, 3, 4 years to get to. I don't think it would have been 4 years. It'd have been like 2 or 3. You know, we've kind of jumped the shark a little bit, and we've gone from it changes that, you know, that would have taken, again, like 2 or 3 years to where now it's going to be, 12 months.
It's crazy, man.
So it's like, we just need to as fans, we've got to wrap our heads around the idea that things are going to look very different going forward.
For sure.
A lot of the characters that we loved, a lot of the comics that we're used to getting all the time, we aren't going to be getting those comics anymore. And whether or not, years down the road, that changes, we don't know. But
that's the thing. I was going to say, like, even if it changes for the next year, 2 years, 3 years, like, nothing like is ever permanent, right? Like, just think of like how many Batman rebooted movies have we gotten? How many different live action Spider-Mans have we gotten? So just because that's like the normal for now, the next year or two, doesn't mean things are going to change. Because for all we know, maybe AT&T sells DC and stuff. Now another company has this, and they want to do a lot more with the publishing side. You know what I mean? We just don't know.
I mean, my personal opinion, my prediction, just because of the direction of technology as a whole and the disruptive nature of the times that we're in as a whole.
Everything's going digital.
Yeah, I don't think we're going back in terms of like, it would be like suggesting that, at the time where we moved from, say, what was it, Napster?
Yeah.
Where we moved from Napster to iTunes, right? And we're seeing the introduction of iTunes and the adoption of iTunes, where we went from this kind of like, this shadow, this shady way of pirating music to this legitimate digital streaming of music. And at that time going, oh, well, we'll probably go back to DC, to CDs or records at some point. That's not going to happen.
Well, I'm talking in the sense of like not necessarily how we read comics, but the amount of titles we're getting. You know what I mean? Like, because, the big thing for me, at least, like losing print would suck drastically. But what would be worse than that is losing the stories, and you can't even read them digitally. So, I'm just hoping that like the the whole digital, if that's what they decide to do, those rumors turned out to be true, like, and we still get those titles, they're just digital now. Awesome. Because imagine only getting 10 digital comics every month. Now that's, you know what I mean? Because the main thing for me is always going to be stories. Sure, I would love to read it in print. I would love to go to comic shops. But the thing that supports this industry at the end of the day is the stories themselves. Not how you read these stories, just the stories. So I just want the volume to be there. Again, losing print would suck drastically. But if we still keep the volume of titles going, that at least is like, okay, well, at least we're getting, our Suicide Squads. We're getting, our freaking, Justice League International book, Justice League Dark, and we're getting all the different versions of the books and characters we like. So here's hoping.
Yeah, we're definitely going to see here pretty soon, I'd say. Yeah, because again, things that we're going to be stretched out over a longer period of time are being expedited now.
Yeah.
With just everything combined that's going on simultaneously. So we're gonna have a much stronger idea of where this is all headed and how fast it's headed there in the next I would say 6 months or so.
For sure.
But we're definitely headed digital. I don't think that all signs are pointing north. We're headed digital as far as comic book and the comic book industry and how we get and read our comics. And, we're all going to have to embrace that. Adoption is coming, and, everything else is going to be about, collectors. And then everything is just going to boil down to profitability. In terms of the volume of comics, I have to imagine when it comes to AT&T, as long as AT&T owns DC, we are going to see in the future going forward after these current events and so forth, and these changes are implemented, we're going to see limited titles, and they're going to be looking to just simply exploit the IPs as much as possible across digital content platforms like HBO Max. Because even again, you're while you're considering all these disruptions, you have to also be thinking about the fact that we are seeing massive disruption in the filmmaking industry as a whole. What's happening to theaters? What's going to happen to theaters over the next 12 months or so, especially if we see more serious lockdowns and things. They're on their last legs as it is. So
I'd be very curious to see how long that would last, though, because if, the rumors are true again and we do see a significant drop in titles, it's like, well, then you're also limiting like possibilities for like new IPs, right? Because the Suicide Squad was not a famous IP 5 years ago, 7 years ago. It's only huge now because they decided to do a movie with it, and everyone was like, oh yeah, awesome, whether you like the movie or not. It made the world know about it. Then it got several comic books, and now it's like one of the most popular things. You know what I mean? Same thing with Justice League Dark. Though it's only had animated movies, not a live action movie, the comic was so successful, it's been in talks for Hollywood by massive directors like Guillermo del Toro and a bunch of other people to make it into a live action movie. I believe now it's going to be an HBO Max TV series with J.J. Abrams at the helm. So, if you don't give chances to these new titles and allow creators to make these new IPs, then you won't be able to turn them into movies and comics. So I feel like stunting that indefinitely would be a massive harm to DC and Warner Brothers and AT&T as a whole, because now you're just saying, oh, well, we're only ever going to do Batman, Flash, and Wonder Woman and the Justice League stuff. We're never going to leave anything open for, new teams and characters to be made like Justice League Dark, the Suicide Squad, and so on and so forth. You know what I mean?
Yeah, no, I absolutely do. I just don't know that being in the industry and knowing how these people think, I don't think that they're going to think of it that way.
Well, they're dumb.
They're going to say, I think the way that they're going to approach it is, we don't need comic books when we can bring these same writers on board to screenwriting teams and screenwriting groups and write them into television shows, into movies, and basically build out these stories and these universes, even introducing new characters on the big screen or on the small screen in a big with big screen quality. Right? So they're going to look at it that way, because they're not going to do away with comics. Obviously, they're going to have comics going. It's just going to be minimal. They're going to try and minimize that. And then, if it's profitable for them and they're
going to pull a Harley Quinn, because she was introduced in Batman the Animated Series and then came into the comic books.
Yeah,
that's one way you could go.
Exactly right. Yeah, you don't think they're looking at that and seeing like, hey, like look, some of the biggest characters that have come out of DC in the last 2 decades were characters that were introduced in animated, series.
But that is right? Such like, that is a rarity. You know what I mean? Like that was like to get something as iconic and add as much mythos to, comic books like Batman the Animated Series or other shows that's like lightning in a bottle. You can't just make that. Yeah. You know what I mean?
Well, I wouldn't say it's lightning in a bottle. I would say that they're going to look at it as like it's only more rare because it wasn't done as much. I think they're going to view that as case positive of you can do this either way and achieve the same ends, right? They're going to say, okay, we don't necessarily need to have 20, 25, 30 different books going simultaneously to get the content that we want for the bigger money-making aspects of our business model, which is clearly going to be digital streaming content.
I don't know, with that, as far as making iconic characters, because like Harley Quinn, for instance, is like easily one of the most popular comic book characters of all time, not just with DC. Everyone knows who Harley Quinn is. So something like that, like that doesn't happen often at all. Like sure, there's a lot of characters that'll cross over from TV shows and then movies, but like to get something like Harley Quinn, who's arguably just as popular as someone like, a Wonder Woman, a Superman, a Batman, you're gonna have to be pumping out a lot of stuff to hope to hit on something like that. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and I would say that that's true generally overall. Yeah. Anyway, like even in comics, like it's you only strike gold once in a blue moon. Like it doesn't happen that often.
Although James Tynion has been hitting gold like a lot lately.
But even though they're cool characters, is like how many of them are going to be
the longevity of Harley Quinn.
Yeah, to where they're like these monster fan-loved characters that are, emulated and repeated.
Hey man, I just got to play devil's advocate over here. You know what I mean? We need a good cop, bad cop over here.
Yes, absolutely. So I think that we're probably going to see, a dramatically reduced catalog of titles initially. And then if it's profitable for them and they're they can continue, at least on the DC side, they can continue to make the argument of like, hey, this is going to benefit us going forward. We can add this title, that title. They may slowly expand the budget, or we could see what we've already talked about as well, them saying, okay, we're going to do this very limited run under our roof to keep our overhead and our staffing as small as possible. And then the rest to build out from there, we're going to be doing and involving other publishers, licensing things out and letting them expand and have some creative license to develop new stories and characters, using these IPs that we're not using under this umbrella anymore. You know what I mean? And then from there, they're going to be focusing heavily on the biggest money-making machines, which again is clearly the video game world and the digital streaming content world. And, especially now, again, we don't know what the future of theater going is going to look like entirely. So if we continue to kind of like move heavily in this direction where everything is home entertainment and we're literally going to be getting theater quality content on these streaming platforms, i.e. Wonder Woman 1984, landing at the same exact time as it's landing in theaters on Christmas Day.
Or Pixar's Soul going straight to Disney Plus Christmas Day.
Exactly right. Yeah. I mean, we actually have, we saw Disney drop a couple of their big screen
Mulan
films onto their Disney Plus. And again, it was by force. They had to do it because they've already spent $200 million on this film and it's been
all hands on deck.
And yeah. So, but it's like, if those are successful, with these direct to home, these on demand moves, if they're successful and they're seeing profitability there, then that's going to completely de-incentivize them in saying, okay, well, why are we going to spend all this extra money and splitting our box office with these theater chains with, you know what I'm saying? All these things cost them extra money. So if we can internalize this more and we're still seeing profitability from it, because we're seeing kind of the people's behavioral patterns change, then why would we do that? We're going to move away from that. And, not entirely, because I know for like me, I want to go see Wonder Woman 1984 in the theater. Right?
We posted a poll on our variant Instagram about that. And
yeah, the vast majority of people probably aren't.
38% want to see it in theaters. 62% want to see it at home on HBO Max.
Well, I think you have to make a clear differentiation there. It's not to see it in theaters. It's going to see it.
Want to in the sense of that's how they're going to see it. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Although, because I guarantee you the vast majority of people want to see it on the big screen. It's just they don't feel comfortable doing so.
Yeah, which, I mean, but like to your point, I'm wondering like how that's going to change, going forward. Because, if humans are anything, we're adaptable and we get comfortable in, habits that we formed. So this has been a long year and habits have definitely been formed. So I wonder how many people are going to be like, why would I want to go out when you could give it to me here and I could save all that money? I'll buy a 70-inch TV. I'll get a Dolby Atmos surround sound. No, man, I could pause it. I could pee, bring my own snacks. Screw that. You know what I mean?
Yep. If we know anything about human beings, it's that they are creatures of both comfort and habit. And it doesn't take very long for them to get used to a new way of doing things. They don't accept change quickly, but once change is forced upon them, changing back is just as difficult as changing forward. You know what I'm saying?
All this to say, no matter how you slice it, there's changes coming for DC in 2021 and beyond. And
big ones.
We're going to be here to talk about it every step of the way, as we've been talking about it. And something we kind of overlooked that I just want to mention briefly here before we wrap up, in Death Metal issue 5, they revealed that Batman has been dead since the beginning of Death Metal. That's right. The main continuity Batman has been dead since their first fight with Perpetua. And the only reason he's been alive and you could see him in this book is because, as we know, he has the Black Lantern ring. So that's why he has the ring. That's why he's been controlling dead people. And he's been dead. Now, ordinarily, this would be like a big bomb. And it'd be like, oh my God, the main continuity Batman is dead. Right, this is crazy. Yeah. But since this is within a crisis event, we know long term, it doesn't really matter because it's all going to be reset and continuity is going to be rebooted by, end of December, and Bruce Wayne, or a new version of Bruce Wayne or whatever, will be restored.
Or so we think. Anyway.
Yeah, we'll be restored in a DC Future State. So like, for the context of the story, amazing twist. I was like, holy crap. But then when you think about it, you're like, but it really doesn't matter because they're about to reboot everything. So although they're like, everything, their whole thing is everything happens, everything matters. But we've seen in DC Future State, a homeless looking Batman, a poor looking Batman on one of the covers. And we know in James Tynion's Batman run that he just lost all of his money and Lucius Fox has the money now. So maybe we're just going to get a low budget Batman in DC Future State.
Yeah. I think, first of all, I think it's hilarious that this was like one of the biggest parts of this book. And we like leapfrogged over and talked for like an hour about this subject without even mentioning it.
Like in the grand scheme of things, like I just said, it really doesn't matter. Like in 2 more issues, everything's going to be reset and, Bruce will be back in January. So it's like in the story, it's a cool twist, but long term, it's like, he'll be back.
It's so true. I will say though, it was a cool reveal inside the title, especially because it was one. It's kind of like watching The Sixth Sense for the first time with the whole "I see dead people." You're just like, all the signs were there the whole
He says he sees dead people, meaning he sees you because you're dead. Spoiler.
Yeah, because you're dead, man. So this was very much that kind of a reveal, which was a lot of fun. But it was definitely overshadowed by everything else that's going on. And what it means for the overall DC universe.
Because the main story right here for me at least, while reading Death Metal, I'm like, I want to, the big spectacle and the event and the fights. But the main thing and the main reason I'm interested in the story now is because it's telling us how DC is changing. And I think that's the main reason everyone should be reading it right now. If you're a big DC fan, you need to be reading this series because this is literally telling you what's happening to DC and how it's going to change going forward.
Without any question. If you're a DC fan, what's going on right now in DC Comics is a must read. And if you're anything like us, like the conversations that is going on right now about like what does this mean? What are they doing? Where is this all going? What is it confirming? It's pretty much nonstop. And it's really fascinating because the industry it's been a long time. I'll say it like that. It's been a very long time since the industry has seen this level of disruption, especially considering the golden age of geekdom that we're in. It's actually kind of bizarre to see this level of disruption within the comic book industry. But it's happening nonetheless, and it's wild to watch unfold.
Really, really crazy. But like I said a minute ago, we'll be here each and every week to keep talking to you guys as more and more unfolds with DC and just comics in general, as we always do. And of course, The Mandalorian, because The Mandalorian.
Yeah, of course. Always Mandalorian.
God.
We're going to have to change the show to The Mandalorian.
I love that show. Dude, we need to just get them to be a sponsor because they're not even sponsored and we're drooling all over that show.
Yeah, come on, Disney. Where are you at?
We love it. We'll talk good about you, we swear.
Yeah, and speaking of, Let's get off this podcast so we can watch
That's
it.
true. That's true. I'm itching. I've been staying off of the freaking Instagram and social all day because I swear,
I know,
if someone
same
posts
here.
a picture of Ahsoka, I am going to be livid. I want to see it for the first time on my 65-inch Samsung.
Yes. yes, 100 times yes.
All right. But with that said, guys, we'll see you next time when we talk about all things comics.